She saw the same homeless man every day, but the truth about him broke her soul. Every morning at exactly 7:15 a.m., Rachel Martinez would walk past the same homeless man on her way to work. He sat in the doorway of an abandoned bookstore on 5th Street, always in the same position, back against the weathered door, knees drawn up, a faded military jacket wrapped around his thin frame. His gray hair was unkempt, his beard scraggly, and his eyes held a distant, haunted look that seemed to stare right through the bustling world around him. Rachel, a 34-year-old marketing executive, had been taking this route to her downtown office for 3 years. In all that time, she had never seen the man speak to anyone, never seen him ask for money, never seen him move from that spot except to occasionally shift positions. He was like a fixture of the street, as permanent and unremarkable as the cracked sidewalk beneath her designer heels. Like most busy professionals, Rachel had developed the urban skill of selective blindness. She could navigate crowded streets, dodge panhandlers, and avoid eye contact with homeless individuals without breaking stride or interrupting her morning phone calls. The homeless man in the doorway had become part of her daily landscape, noticed but not acknowledged, seen but not truly observed. But lately, something about him had begun to bother her. Maybe it was the way he never seemed to eat, despite the fact that other homeless people in the area were often seen with food or drinks. Maybe it was how he never seemed to sleep, always sitting in that same alert position no matter what time of day she passed by. Or maybe it was the military jacket he wore, which looked authentic and well-maintained. Despite his otherwise disheveled appearance, Rachel's father had been a Vietnam veteran, and she had grown up hearing stories about the struggles that many soldiers faced when they returned home. The sight of what appeared to be another veteran living on the streets stirred something uncomfortable in her chest, a mixture of guilt, sadness, and a nagging sense that she should be doing something more than just walking past every day. This particular Tuesday morning, Rachel was running late for an important client presentation. She had overslept, spilled coffee on her first outfit choice, and was now hurrying down 5th Street while trying to review her notes on her phone. As she approached the bookstore doorway, she barely glanced up from her screen. That's when she heard a sound so soft she almost missed it over the traffic noise and her own clicking heels. It was humming. The homeless man was humming a tune, barely audible but distinctly melodic. Rachel slowed her pace, straining to hear the melody, and her heart nearly stopped when she recognized it. It was Amazing Grace, but not the version most people knew. This was a specific arrangement, a haunting, complex harmony that she had only heard in one place: the military chapel where her father's funeral had been held 15 years ago. It was the version that the honor guard had hummed while folding the flag that had covered her father's casket. Rachel stopped walking entirely, her phone forgotten in her hand as she stared at the homeless man. He seemed unaware of her attention, lost in his quiet humming, his eyes focused on something far beyond the busy street. There was something about his posture, the way he held his shoulders, that suddenly seemed familiar. Military bearing, her father would have called it, the kind of ingrained discipline that never fully leaves a soldier, even in the worst circumstances. For the first time in 3 years, Rachel really looked at the man in the doorway. She noticed the dog tags hanging from a chain around his neck, partially hidden by his jacket. She saw the small American flag pin attached to his collar, tarnished, but still proudly displayed. She observed the way his hands were positioned, not randomly, but in a specific pose that she recognized from countless military ceremonies. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just any homeless veteran. This was a man who had served his country with honor, who had participated in sacred military traditions, who had once been someone's son, someone's brother, maybe someone's father. And now he was sitting in a doorway, invisible to the world he had once sworn to protect. Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she stood there on the sidewalk, commuters flowing around her like water around a stone. She thought about her father, about the respect and gratitude he had received for his service, about the comfortable life he had been able to build after the war. She thought about the promises society made to its veterans, that their service would be honored, their sacrifices remembered, their needs met. And then she looked at this man, humming a sacred military hymn in a doorway, forgotten by the very society he had served. Rachel stood frozen on the sidewalk for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The homeless man continued his quiet humming, seemingly unaware of her scrutiny. Other pedestrians flowed around both of them, absorbed in their own morning routines, their own urgent destinations. The city moved on, indifferent to the moment of recognition that was transforming Rachel's understanding of the world around her. Finally, Rachel approached the doorway slowly, her heart pounding with nervousness and uncertainty. She had never directly interacted with a homeless person before, and she wasn't sure of the protocol. Should she offer money, food, or would that be patronizing? She cleared her throat softly, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me," she said gently. "I couldn't help but notice. Were you humming Amazing Grace?" The man looked up at her, and Rachel was struck by the clarity and intelligence in his eyes. They were blue, she noticed, a pale blue that seemed to hold depths of experience and pain. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear, with the measured cadence of someone accustomed to giving orders. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, with a slight nod that seemed almost like a salute. It's a beautiful hymn. Brings me comfort. Rachel felt her throat tighten. My father was a veteran. That arrangement. It was played at his funeral. The honor guard version. Something shifted in the man's expression, a flicker of recognition, of shared understanding. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. What branch did your father serve in? Army, 101st Airborne, Vietnam. Rachel paused, then asked, what about you? Did you serve? The man's posture straightened almost imperceptibly. Marines. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. Gunnery Sergeant James Mitchell, retired, he said it with quiet pride. Despite his current circumstances, Rachel felt her knees go weak. This wasn't just a homeless veteran, this was a career military man, someone who had dedicated his life to service, someone who had earned the respect that came with his rank. The contrast between his military bearing and his current situation was heartbreaking. Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell, Rachel said, using his proper title instinctively. I'm Rachel Martinez. I walk past here every morning on my way to work. I've seen you here for years, but I'm ashamed to say I never really saw you. James studied her face carefully, as if trying to determine whether her interest was genuine or just another form of pity. Most people don't. Ma'am, it's not personal. People see what they expect to see. But you're a Marine, Rachel said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. You served our country. How did you end up ... She gestured helplessly at the doorway, unable to finish the question. James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the middle distance. When he spoke, his voice was steady but filled with a pain that made Rachel's chest ache. Same way a lot of us end up here, ma'am. Came back from my last deployment with some invisible wounds. PTSD, they called it. Couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate, couldn't hold down a job. Started drinking to quiet the noise in my head. Lost my family first, then my house, then everything else. He paused, then added with bitter irony, turns out it's easier to survive in a war zone than it is to survive coming home from one. Rachel felt tears streaming down her face. She thought about her comfortable life, her successful career, her assumption that the system would take care of those who had served. But there are programs, aren't there? VA benefits? Support services. James's laugh was hollow. There are programs. Yes, ma'am. Long waiting lists, complicated paperwork, bureaucrats who've never heard a shot fired in anger telling you what you need. I tried for a while, but the system's designed for people who can advocate for themselves. When you're dealing with trauma and addiction, navigating bureaucracy becomes impossible. Rachel looked around at the busy street, at all the people hurrying, passed without a second glance at this decorated veteran sitting in a doorway. How long have you been here, in this spot? I mean, about 4 years now, James replied. The owner of the bookstore died, and his family couldn't keep it open. Nobody bothers me here, and it's relatively safe. I've got a good view of the street, can see trouble coming. Even in his explanation, Rachel could hear the tactical thinking of a trained soldier. For years, Rachel repeated, the number hitting her like a physical blow. For years, and I walked past you every single day without acknowledging that you existed. Like I said, ma'am, it's not personal. Most people don't know how to process what they're seeing. It's easier to look away than to confront the reality that this could happen to anyone. Rachel wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. What can I do? How can I help? James shook his head gently. I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I'm not looking for charity. I've made my peace with where I am. But you shouldn't have to, Rachel insisted. You served our country. You deserve better than this. Deserve's got nothing to do with it. James replied with the philosophical acceptance of someone who had learned hard lessons about life's unfairness. This is just where I ended up. I'm not the first Marine to fall through the cracks, and I won't be the last. Rachel stood there, feeling helpless and overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was learning. This wasn't just about one homeless veteran, it was about a system that had failed. A society that had forgotten its promises, and her own complicity in that forgetting. Rachel arrived at work 45 minutes late, her eyes red from crying, and her mind completely unfocused. Her assistant, Jennifer, took one look at her and immediately asked if she was okay. I'm fine, Rachel lied, then immediately corrected herself. Actually, no, I'm not fine at all. I just had a conversation that completely changed how I see the world. The client presentation that had seemed so important that morning now felt trivial and meaningless. Rachel went through the motions, delivering her pitch with professional competence, but her heart wasn't in it. All she could think about was James Mitchell, sitting in that doorway, forgotten by the world he had served. During her lunch break, Rachel found herself researching veteran homelessness statistics on her computer. What she learned made her feel sick. Tens of thousands of veterans were living on the streets across the country. Many, like James, were dealing with PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, and substance abuse issues that made it difficult to navigate the complex systems designed to help them. She read story after story of decorated soldiers who had come home to find themselves unable to adjust to civilian life, unable to access the care they needed, unable to maintain the relationships and employment that might have kept them housed. The more she read, the more she understood that James's story wasn't unique, it was tragically common. That evening, Rachel couldn't concentrate on anything. She tried to watch television, but every commercial featuring happy families made her think about the family James had lost. She tried to read, but the words blurred together as her mind kept returning to the doorway on 5th Street. Finally, she gave up on trying to distract herself and drove back downtown. She wasn't sure what she hoped to accomplish, but she felt compelled to see James again, to make sure he was real and not just a figment of her guilty conscience. The bookstore doorway was empty. Rachel parked her car and walked up and down the street, looking for any sign of James. She asked other homeless individuals if they had seen him, describing his military jacket and his quiet demeanor. Most people shook their heads, but one woman pointed toward an alley behind a restaurant. "Sometimes the quiet ones go back there when they need to be alone," she said. "Check behind Murphy's Diner." Rachel found James sitting on a milk crate behind the restaurant, staring up at the stars that were barely visible through the city's light pollution. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and she saw a surprise flicker across his face. "Ms. Martinez, what are you doing here?" "I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation this morning," Rachel admitted. "I've been researching veteran homelessness all day, and I'm horrified by what I've learned. I had no idea how bad the situation was." James nodded slowly. "Most people don't. It's easier to believe that the system works, that people like me are just the exceptions." Rachel sat down on another milk crate, not caring that her expensive suit would probably be ruined. "Tell me more about your story. I want to understand how this happened." James was quiet for a long time, and Rachel worried that she had overstepped, that he would shut down or ask her to leave. But finally he began to speak, his voice low and measured. "I enlisted when I was 18, he said. "Came from a small town in Ohio, didn't have much going for me except a desire to serve my country. The Marines gave me purpose, structure, a sense of belonging I'd never had before. I was good at it, really good. Made rank quickly, became the kind of NCO that younger Marines looked up to." He paused, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I did 5 deployments over 12 years. Saw things, did things that I can't talk about. Lost friends, good Marines, who deserved to come home more than I did. But I kept going because that's what Marines do. We adapt, we overcome, we complete the mission." Rachel listened in silence, sensing that James needed to tell this story as much as she needed to hear it. "The last deployment was the worst," James continued. "I'd took out half my squad. I was the senior NCO, responsible for getting everyone home safe, and I failed. 3 Marines died under my command. Kids who trusted me to keep them alive." His voice broke slightly, and Rachel saw tears in his eyes. "I came home carrying their ghosts. Couldn't sleep because I'd see their faces every time I closed my eyes. Couldn't concentrate because I was always listening for incoming mortar. Couldn't connect with my wife and kids because how do you explain to civilians what it's like to watch your friends die?" Rachel felt her own tears starting again. "What happened to your family?" Sarah tried to be patient, tried to understand. "But I was drinking heavily, having nightmares, flying into rages over nothing. She was scared of me, and she had every right to be. I wasn't the man she married anymore. I was a stranger wearing his face." James wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "She took the kids and left. Filed for divorce 6 months later. I didn't fight it. They deserved better than what I had become. And the VA, didn't they help?" James's expression hardened. "I tried, ma'am. Spent months in waiting rooms, filled out forms, told my story to counselors who looked at me like I was just another broken soldier. They prescribed pills that made me feel like a zombie, recommended group therapy sessions where we all sat around comparing our damage. Nothing helped with the real problem, the guilt, the shame, the feeling that I had failed, the most important mission of my life." Rachel was beginning to understand the complexity of James's situation. This wasn't just about needing a job or a place to live. This was about a man whose entire identity had been built around being a protector, a leader, someone others could depend on. The trauma of losing Marines under his command had shattered that identity, leaving him unable to see himself as anything but a failure. "So you ended up on the streets," Rachel said softly. "Lost my job first, couldn't function in a civilian workplace. Then lost my apartment when I couldn't pay rent. Spent some time in shelters, but they're not safe places for someone with PTSD. Too many people, too much noise, too many triggers. The streets are quieter, more predictable. I can control my environment, watch for threats, maintain some of the tactical awareness that kept me alive overseas." James looked at Rachel directly for the first time since he'd started talking. "I know how this looks to people like you. Successful, put-together people with normal lives. You see failure, weakness, someone who couldn't handle the transition back to civilian life. But the truth is, I'm doing exactly what I was trained to do. I'm surviving in a hostile environment with limited resources. The only difference is that now the hostile environment is my own country." Rachel spent the next several days unable to focus on anything but James's story. She found herself researching not just veteran homelessness, but the specific challenges faced by combat veterans with PTSD. She learned about moral injury, the psychological damage that occurs when someone is forced to act against their deeply held moral beliefs, or when they witness or fail to prevent acts that violate their moral code. James's guilt over losing Marines under his command was a textbook case of moral injury. He had been trained to protect his soldiers, to bring them home safely, and his inability to do so had shattered his sense of self-worth and purpose. The traditional treatments for PTSD often didn't address this deeper spiritual and moral wound. Rachel also learned about the concept of invisible wounds, the traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, and other psychological damage that wasn't immediately apparent but could be just as debilitating as physical injuries. Society was good at honoring veterans with visible wounds, but those with invisible wounds often fell through the cracks, their struggles dismissed or misunderstood. On Thursday morning, Rachel approached James's doorway with a cup of coffee and a breakfast sandwich. She had been thinking about their conversation for days, and she had an idea that she wasn't sure he would accept. "Good morning, Gunnery Sergeant," she said. Using his military title deliberately, James looked up, and Rachel thought she saw a flicker of appreciation in his eyes at being addressed by his rank. "Morning, ma'am. You don't have to keep bringing me food." "I know I don't have to," Rachel replied, sitting down beside him on the concrete. "I want to, but I also want to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say no." James accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. "I'm listening." "I work for a marketing firm," Rachel began. "We specialize in corporate social responsibility campaigns, helping companies develop programs that give back to the community. I've been thinking about what you said, about how the system fails veterans like you, and I have an idea." She pulled out her phone and showed James a document she had been working on. "What if we created a program that specifically addressed the needs of combat veterans with PTSD? Not just housing and job training, but comprehensive support that addressed the whole person, the trauma, the moral injury, the loss of identity and purpose." James studied the document, his expression unreadable. "Sounds like a lot of other programs that already exist, but this would be different." Rachel insisted it would be designed by veterans, for veterans. "It would recognize that what you're dealing with isn't weakness or failure. It's the natural result of being asked to do impossible things in impossible situations. It would focus on rebuilding identity and purpose, not just treating symptoms." Rachel took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to propose would sound crazy. "I want you to help me design it. I want your expertise, your understanding of what veterans actually need versus what bureaucrats think they need." James stared at her in disbelief. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm a homeless man with untreated PTSD and a drinking problem. I'm not exactly consultant material. You're a decorated Marine with 15 years of military experience and 4 years of surviving on the streets," Rachel countered. "You understand both the military mindset and the reality of what happens when the system fails. That makes you more qualified than most people to design a program that actually works." James was quiet for a long time, and Rachel could see him wrestling with the idea. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't felt useful. In 4 years, haven't felt like I had anything to contribute to the world." "You have everything to contribute," Rachel said firmly. "Your experience, your insights, your understanding of what it means to serve and to suffer. That's not weakness, that's wisdom." Over the next hour, Rachel outlined her vision for the program. It would start with a comprehensive assessment that looked at each veteran's specific needs, not just housing and employment, but mental health, substance abuse, family relationships, and sense of purpose. It would provide not just services, but community, a network of veterans who understood each other's struggles and could provide mutual support. Most importantly, it would recognize that many veterans needed more than just help. They needed a mission. The program would create opportunities for veterans to serve again, to use their skills and experience to help other veterans, to rebuild their sense of identity and purpose. "It sounds too good to be true," James said finally. "Programs like this require funding, political support, institutional backing. Why would anyone listen to a homeless veteran and a marketing executive?" Rachel smiled for the first time in days. "Because we're going to make them listen. I have contacts in the corporate world, connections with nonprofits, relationships with local government officials. And you have something more valuable than all of that. You have the truth about what veterans actually need." James looked at Rachel with something approaching hope in his eyes. "You really think this could work?" "I think it has to work," Rachel replied. "Because there are thousands of veterans like you out there, and they deserve better than what they're getting. They deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be valued for who they are and what they've given." James was quiet for another long moment. Then he straightened his shoulders in a gesture that reminded Rachel of the Marine he had once been. "All right, ma'am," he said with quiet determination. "Let's give it a shot. But I have one condition." "What's that?" "We do this right. No half measures, no feel-good publicity stunts. If we're going to do this, we're going to create something that actually makes a difference in veterans' lives." Rachel extended her hand to James, and he shook it firmly. "Semper Fi, Gunnery Sergeant, Semper Fi, ma'am." The transformation in James over the following weeks was remarkable. Having a mission, a purpose beyond mere survival, seemed to awaken something in him that had been dormant for years. He threw himself into researching existing veteran programs, identifying their strengths and weaknesses, and developing a comprehensive plan for what would become the Invisible Wounds Initiative. Rachel was amazed by James's intelligence and insight. Despite years of living on the streets, his mind was sharp and his understanding of organizational dynamics was sophisticated. He had natural leadership abilities that had been honed by years of military service, and he approached the project with the same methodical precision he had once brought to military operations. They met every morning at the bookstore doorway, which had become their unofficial office. Rachel would bring coffee and breakfast, and they would spend an hour reviewing their progress, discussing strategies, and refining their approach. James had notebooks filled with detailed plans, organizational charts, and implementation time. His military training in logistics and planning was evident in every aspect of their work. The key, James explained one morning, is understanding that every veteran's situation is different. A Marine who lost limbs to an IED has different needs than an Army medic who's dealing with moral injury from the casualties he couldn't save. A Navy veteran with PTSD from sexual assault has different needs than an Air Force pilot who's struggling with survivor's guilt. Rachel nodded, taking notes on her laptop. So we need a program that's flexible enough to address individual needs, but comprehensive enough to handle the full spectrum of issues. Exactly. And it has to be run by people who understand military culture. Civilians mean well, but they don't understand the mindset, the values, the way we process trauma and loss. Their first breakthrough came when Rachel arranged a meeting with her company's biggest client, a Fortune 500 corporation that was looking for a high-impact social responsibility project. Rachel had prepared extensively for the presentation, but she was nervous about how James would be received. Despite his intelligence and expertise, he was still a homeless man in worn clothing, and she worried that the corporate executives wouldn't be able to see past his appearance. She needn't have worried. James walked into that boardroom with the bearing of the Marine he had always been. He spoke with quiet authority about the challenges facing veterans, the failures of existing programs, and the potential impact of their proposed initiative. He presented statistics, case studies, and implementation strategies with the precision of a military briefing. The executives were captivated. Here was someone who wasn't just talking about veteran issues from an academic perspective. He was living them, surviving them, and finding ways to transform his experience into solutions for others. Mr. Mitchell, the CEO said after James finished his presentation, I have to ask, what's your background? Your understanding of these issues is incredibly sophisticated. James straightened his shoulders. I'm a retired Marine gunnery sergeant. With 15 years of active duty service, including 5 combat deployments, I'm also a homeless veteran with PTSD who's been living on the streets for 4 years. That combination gives me a unique perspective on both the problem and potential solutions. The room was silent for a moment as the executives processed this information. Then the CEO leaned forward with obvious interest. And you're willing to lead this initiative, to be the public face of the program? James glanced at Rachel, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, sir. I believe this program could save lives, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it successful. The corporation committed to funding the pilot program with a $2 million grant. Within weeks, Rachel and James had secured additional funding from other sources, recruited a team of veteran volunteers, and begun developing the infrastructure for their program. James's transformation was remarkable to witness. As he took on more responsibility, as he began to feel useful again, the haunted look in his eyes gradually faded. He still struggled with PTSD symptoms, still had bad days when the memories threatened to overwhelm him, but he now had something to fight for beyond mere survival. You know what the strangest part is? James told Rachel one morning as they reviewed applications from veterans seeking to join their program. For 4 years, I felt like I was dead inside, like the part of me that was a Marine had died along with my soldiers. But working on this project, helping other veterans, it's like that part of me is coming back to life. Rachel smiled, remembering the broken man she had first encountered in the bookstore doorway. You were never dead inside, James. You were just waiting for the right mission. The Invisible Wounds Initiative officially launched 6 months after Rachel's first conversation with James. The program provided comprehensive support for combat veterans with PTSD, including housing assistance, mental health treatment, job, training, and most importantly, opportunities to serve again by helping other veterans. James had moved into a small apartment and was working full-time as the program's director. He had reconnected with his ex-wife and children, not to reconcile romantically, but to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by his trauma. His daughter, now 16, had written him a letter saying how proud she was of the work he was doing. I always knew my dad was a hero, she wrote, but now I understand that being a hero isn't just about what you do in war, it's about what you do with your pain, how you use your struggles to help other people. The program's success exceeded everyone's expectations. Within its first year, it had helped over 200 veterans find stable housing and employment. More importantly, it had created a community of mutual support where veterans could share their experiences without judgment and find new purpose in helping others heal. James had become a sought-after speaker at conferences and events, sharing his story and advocating for better support for veterans with invisible wounds. He spoke with the same quiet authority he had always possessed, but now there was hope in his voice instead of despair. 2 years after their first conversation, Rachel and James stood together at a podium in the state capitol, preparing to address a joint session of the legislature about veteran homelessness and the need for comprehensive support programs. The Invisible Wounds Initiative had become a model for similar programs across the country, and they had been invited to share their expertise with policymakers. James looked out at the assembled legislators, many of whom had never served in the military, and began to speak with the calm confidence of someone who had found his purpose again. 2 years ago, I was sitting in a doorway, invisible to the world around me, he said. I was a decorated Marine who had served his country with honor, but I had become just another homeless veteran, another statistic, another problem that society preferred to ignore rather than address. He paused, his gaze finding Rachel in the audience. She smiled encouragingly, remembering the broken man she had first encountered and marveling at the transformation that had occurred. But I wasn't invisible because I chose to be, James continued. I was invisible because we, as a society, have made the choice not to see our veterans when they're struggling, not to acknowledge our responsibility to those who have served. James went on to describe the Invisible Wounds Initiative, its successes, and its potential for expansion. He spoke about the veterans they had helped, the lives they had saved, the families they had reunited. But more than that, he spoke about the fundamental truth that had driven their work from the beginning. Every veteran who ends up on the streets is someone who once raised their right hand and swore to defend this country, James said, his voice growing stronger with each word. They didn't fail us, we failed them. But failure doesn't have to be permanent. With the right support, the right understanding, and the right opportunities to serve again, these veterans can not only rebuild their lives, but become powerful forces for helping others do the same. The legislature voted unanimously to fund a statewide expansion of the Invisible Wounds Initiative. As they left the Capitol building, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that morning? She asked James as they walked toward their car. James considered the question seriously. I probably would have died in that doorway, eventually. Maybe not from the cold or hunger, but from the hopelessness. When you lose your sense of purpose, when you feel like you have nothing to contribute to the world, you start to fade away, even while you're still breathing. But you did have something to contribute, Rachel pointed out. You always did. I know that now, James replied, but I needed someone else to see it first, to believe in it before I could believe in it myself. That's what you gave me that morning. Not just acknowledgement, but recognition of my worth as a human being. Rachel thought about all the homeless individuals she still passed on her way to work, all the invisible people who populated the margins of society. James's story had taught her that everyone had value, everyone had something to contribute, but sometimes it took another person's recognition to help them see it themselves. The program is expanding faster than we ever imagined, Rachel said. Veterans from all over the country are reaching out, wanting to start similar initiatives in their communities. James nodded with satisfaction. That's the thing about Marines. We adapt, we overcome, and we take care of our own. Once you give us a mission we believe in, there's no stopping us. As they drove back to their office, Rachel reflected on how much her own life had changed since that morning when she first really saw James. Her work had taken on new meaning, her priorities had shifted, and she had discovered a sense of purpose she hadn't known she was missing. You know, she said to James, I thought I was helping you that first morning, but looking back, I think you helped me more than I helped you. James smiled, the same quiet smile that had become his trademark in interviews and speaking engagements. That's the thing about service, ma'am. When you help someone else find their purpose, you usually end up finding your own. The Invisible Wounds Initiative continued to grow and evolve, helping thousands of veterans across the country rebuild their lives and rediscover their sense of purpose. But perhaps its greatest achievement was changing how society viewed homeless veterans not as failures or statistics, but as human beings with inherent worth and valuable contributions to make. James never forgot the lesson he had learned in that bookstore doorway, that everyone is fighting battles others can't see, that dignity and worth aren't determined by circumstances, and that sometimes the most powerful thing one person can do for another is simply to see them, acknowledge them, and recognize their humanity. Their story reminds us that the people we pass by every day, the ones we've learned not to see, all have stories worth hearing and wisdom worth sharing. Sometimes the person who appears to have nothing to offer is actually the one who has the most to teach us about resilience, courage, and the power of human connection. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and valued, please subscribe to our channel. We share stories of hope, transformation, and the incredible ways that ordinary people can change the world when they choose to truly see each other. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of people who believe that every person has worth, every story matters, and that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simple act of recognition.